Okay, so today I'm joined by Stella Creasy, MP, known for her fierce advocacy on women's rights, from fighting for maternity protections to challenging systemic misogyny in politics. Now she's leading the charge to decriminalise abortion in England and Wales. In 2025, women are still being prosecuted under laws written in 1861, before we could even vote. This conversation is about what that means, why it's happening, and how we can stop our rights from being quietly dismantled. So in 2025, women are still being prosecuted for ending pregnancies even after miscarriages. Why has it taken this long to fix it, Stella? And what does that say about how women's rights are still being treated in this country?
Well, actually, Tan, there's something more sinister going on here, because what we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years is an increase in the investigations and prosecutions of women under this law from the 1800s. So something has happened. Nobody's really been able to bottom out what has driven that, but something has happened to generate the investigation. And we've seen some horrific cases. So we've seen a 15-year-old girl who had a late-term miscarriage. She didn't even realise that she was pregnant. And she frankly ended up with a police officer, not a counsellor, at the bottom of her hospital bed. We've seen women being sent to prison. We've certainly seen women being put on trial, all because actually in England and Wales, it's not legal to have an abortion. You have no right to have an abortion. What you have is a set of circumstances in which you should not be prosecuted for having an abortion. And what these prosecutions and investigations show is that actually that protection is pretty shaky, because if people are determined to target women and try and make it harder for women to get access to an abortion, even here in a country where I think people have thought for 50 or 60 years now it's been pretty settled that we should have those rights, well, it's not the case.
Indeed. Do you think it relates to something more structural? Because the Casey Review called the Met Police institutionally misogynistic. And do you think that the far-right narratives are kind of embedding themselves in a system that was essentially already stacked against women?
So have you ever watched the film Jurassic Park? And you know, in Jurassic Park, I know it's an ageing reference now, admittedly, but in Jurassic Park, everybody is looking at the Tyrannosaurus Rex, except for the keeper of the park, who's looking at the velociraptors and going, guys, have you seen that one over there? And then as we see later in the film, the velociraptors are incredibly intelligent, very vicious and very lethal. We have not been paying attention to the way in which anti-abortion activism has been organising, funding itself, recruiting, collaborating around the world, frankly, until too late. So you'll talk to people who say, well, we never saw that Roe versus Wade would get overturned in America. There are thousands of women now who have their rights across Europe to access a safe and legal abortion upended, all because, frankly, we haven't been paying attention to what's been going on relatively under the radar in terms of training, about tactics, about the arguments that you make. So what we're seeing now is, I think, the fruits of that work that has been going on for some years now and is now very much embedded in our society. And that's why many of us are saying, look, we need to sound the alarm about this, because if you're complacent about access to abortion in England and Wales, when already it's not actually very well protected, it's just about being exempted from prosecution. And there is this organisation. And I say that because you ask about the police. Look, we've seen anti-abortion organising in lots of public services now. We see it in the NHS. We see it, frankly, in the civil service. We saw it in the resistance to where we have made progress on abortion rights. And I know we're going to talk about Northern Ireland in a minute. So the idea that there hasn't been a change in strategy by these people, where, you know, they haven't become the velociraptors, is the thing I really want to get across to people, that we should be very worried about. Because I think people think that anti-abortion activism is really obvious, and frankly, it's not. I can't prove to you, I'm not going to say to you for sure I've found the source of it within the police, but it wouldn't surprise me there weren't similar networks in the way that there are in the NHS now, in society, in campuses. I mean, again, people think that our students in this country are progressive. Well, anti-abortion activism within our universities is actually very active now.
Well, that's what worries me, because we've got fewer than 1% of rape cases ending in conviction. Rape survivors aren't protected by the system. We've had a horrible spate of issues with the police, and it's eroding faith in that system. So also, we've got fake patriots like Nigel Farage pushing a kind of foreign-style crackdown, ironically considering he claims to be a patriot, on our rights. So isn't it time we stopped importing the regression and made a stand for women's values. And don't you think that Labour should be the party to do that?
What you saw Nigel Farage do was absolutely out of the Trumpian anti-abortion playbook. So what he said was, oh, I'm pro-choice, but... And then he proceeded to argue that we should change the time limit in this country under which you are exempted from prosecution. Now, vast majority of abortions in this country take place under 10 weeks. The 3,000 every year, so 250,000 abortions every year in this country, 3,000 of them are in that later category. And frankly, Tan, they are the most heartbreaking and heartrending ones, because you have your 20-week scan, you are really excited about becoming a parent, and then you get the worst words of all in a scan, which is, I'm sorry, it's bad news. And we're talking about people who get a diagnosis of fatal fetal abnormality. What that means in layman's terms is you've been told that if your child makes it to birth, they will probably die very quickly afterwards. So what Nigel Farage is essentially asking us to do is make it more likely that we force a woman to carry to term a baby that she knows is going to die. And I just think that's a cruel and unusual torture. Actually, in raising this debate at all, what he's playing into is this idea is that women should have to justify wanting control over their own bodies, that you should have to explain why you want an abortion. I'm really clear. Having an abortion is nobody else's business. It's a healthcare matter. It should be regulated as healthcare. The police shouldn't be part of that conversation unless there is a complete misuse. So people talk about coercion. Absolutely. There are other offences that would cover coercion. The act of having an abortion itself is a healthcare matter, and we see healthcare as private, rightly so. You ask about challenging Farage. Absolutely. I think of that man like people talking about terrible boyfriends, where they say he's confused turning up for taking action, because everything he's talking about will not actually happen or be delivered in a way that would make the lives of my community better. And I came into politics to make the lives of my community better. So it's just a grift for him. You ask about politics within the abortion debate. Actually, I'm just going to disagree with you, mainly because I've always fought very hard to protect these as matters of conscience within Parliament. I have defended the right of people who disagree with being able to access an abortion to be able to make that argument. What I don't defend is their ability to harass women who have an abortion, or their ability to harass people who disagree with them. But I think it's really important that we see these as matters of conscience, because when we have made progress, we've done it on a cross-party basis. And certainly the work we're doing right now to make abortion a human right here in England and Wales, as it is in Northern Ireland, is being done on a cross-party basis, because these are fundamental human rights and we should see them as such. So what Mr. Farage is doing is playing into that Trumpian playbook, which is that women's bodies are the culture war battlefield. And he's wanting you to say women don't have the same right to decide what happens to their body. They should be held to account to explain themselves, and basically they're second-class citizens. And that's where that kind of story about, well, why are you wanting an abortion at a late term when, frankly, it's nobody else's business? I don't think Mr. Farage has ever been in a scan room when someone's been told that, or ever held the hand of somebody who's had to make that impossible decision. I had a constituent who wrote to me about it and her experience of it, and the words that she used just like shot me through the heart, where she said she lost her little boy at 35 weeks and she had that termination because she took the pain so that he didn't have to, because she knew he would suffer if he was born. And nobody wants parents to be in that position, and certainly weaponizing them to make women explain themselves is the Trumpian playbook, and we should have no truck with it.
Yeah, it's an imported culture war, isn't it? That's the problem. But the problem is that Farage is managing to dominate the narrative in Britain. So I think something that plays into this is broadly press regulation. With press regulation, we would not only be able to stop him from implementing these kind of like culture wars as a grift. Do you think there's room in Labour to do that, and to also tighten up the laws around tech?
Oh, look, I certainly hope so. And I've been part of campaigning about AI and about creative rights, but also about recognising social media. I mean, as somebody who's borne the brunt, as I'm sure you have, in fact, any woman in the position of public life, and certainly women of colour have, we can see that the public space that's so important to protect is not a space of free speech when 50% of the conversation is living in fear. I think actually the regulation conversation needs to move to social media. And I think it's quite telling. You know, Mr. Farage is also getting help in this, and help in the argument that women need to be challenged by Vice President J.D. Vance. See, J.D. Vance talks about this country being a country where free speech is under attack. What he's talking about, and the people he's defending, are the people who stand outside abortion clinics, basically harassing women who've made that private decision to have an abortion, and trying to deter them from doing so. And they talk about, the free speech to be able to tell women that you disagree with them. And it's like, absolutely, we must protect the ability to have a debate. You just don't need to have that debate outside an abortion clinic. What I think is quite interesting is those narratives are not being challenged within our media conversations. So we need to speak up for them. One of the reasons why we're pushing for this to be a human right in England and Wales is where there were attacks on buffer zones in Northern Ireland, the Human Rights Commissioner was able to defend them on the basis that this was about how you accessed a safe and legal abortion. So it was your human right not to be hassled when you walked into an abortion clinic. We don't have that protection here. So when Mr. Farage starts, and we think he probably is talking to those people, we can't prove it. And I would say it's a supposition based on the fact that we know that the Free Speech Union is talking to these people. The idea that, being able to pray outside an abortion clinic is somehow a free speech matter more than your right to privacy to be able to access one without somebody doing that to you is one that isn't being contested enough in the press. And I think we should be unashamed to speak up for and say it's always about balancing people's rights. We have to be able to have debate, but you don't need to be able to debate outside an abortion clinic. You just need to be able to go in and be able to do something in private.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are worrying, especially, I know that I have lately, that sadly, like Labour has been echoing a lot of Farage's rhetoric. And we're worried that you're a bit too cautious on this front. So what kind of support is there at the moment in Labour?
It makes me laugh, Tan, because nobody's ever called me cautious. If anything, I always get told to begin with the arguments I'm making, whether it's on payday lending or abortion rights or Brexit, are mad. And then eventually, if we make the argument and we win the argument the democratic way, we can make change happen.
Oh, no, not you. I meant broadly. I mean, I think you're fighting.
Women never get called cautious. They get called difficult. And I always hate that because I'm not difficult. I just approach this in a different way.
Oh, no, absolutely. What I meant to say, maybe I could make myself more clear, is that we feel that Labour broadly has been quite cautious in terms of approaching kind of more progressive policy. And some have been kind of like hanging on the kind of coattails of Farage. Don't you think that this is a real opportunity for Labour to implement progressive policy? As we know, they gave us the NHS, they gave us loads of really progressive policy in the past. Don't you think that this could be a defining moment for Labour to take a stand for real Labour values?
Well, one of the things I'm really proud of was in 2019, we made abortion access a human right in Northern Ireland, and lots of my Labour colleagues stood with us to do that. It was cross-party, and I will hold on to the fact that abortion should be an issue of conscience for people, and that human rights protect you, and actually they free you. At its best, the argument about human rights is that they give you freedoms because it's freedom from harassment. It's freedom to be who you are because of who you are, not in spite of who you are with the state hassling you. It's a weird thing for me right now, Tan, in Parliament. Like, I had a big argument with Danny Kruger the other day that, frankly, we've become the defenders of Winston Churchill's legacy with the European Court of Human Rights, because for me, that's a very libertarian argument. I'm a libertarian. I think that you need somebody to protect you from an overbearing state, and that's what the European Court of Human Rights is. So for me, that's why it's Labour, because it's about freedom. It's about, you want to be techie about it, the concept of emancipation. I want you to be able to live your life in confidence that the state couldn't come after you without being held to account. That's what the European Court of Human Rights, that's why Churchill fought for it, because we saw states who oppressed their people. And, what J.D. Vance is talking about is not free speech, but it's speech for his people. Free speech is the ability, yes, to disagree with people, but also to be able to do that without fear of intimidation or reprisal. And what you're seeing right now in our public realm is intimidation and reprisal. So yes, absolutely. For me, it's a progressive value to stand up to that and call it out and recognise what intimidation looks like. Intimidation looks like being told as a woman that you shouldn't have control over your body, that you don't have the same rights as men to do that, and addressing the fact that we have a rights inequality in this country between Northern Ireland and the rest of this country is something I'd love Labour colleagues to support, but I think it is a cross-party issue. I mean, I'm appealing to everybody to recognise the urgency at the moment, because these rights are under attack. And we've got to do more than just take away the criminal prosecutions. We've got to protect them. We've got to protect buffer zones. We've got to protect the ability of women to have those abortions if they need them at those later points. The only way we do that is to make it a human right and to be proud about what that would do and what that would say about us as a society, that we think everybody, men and women, should be free to control their bodies.
It's astounding that we're even in a position where not only is J.D. Vance having any say whatsoever in our politics, but also that, as you say, our last protection of the state is kind of being marketed almost as the new Brexit. And what people don't realise is what the ECHR has done for us. There's a great video on that, actually, which outlines what it's done for us with some of the best British actors that we've ever seen. Now, you mentioned we've got cross-party support, but my concern is Parliament actually ready to lead on this? Because institutional misogyny still plays a part in every institution, including politics. We've seen awful cases with MPs being accused of terrible crimes. Do you think that will impact people when it comes to standing up for this issue? And do you also think that the creep of kind of like Christian nationalism that's kind of like being pushed by people like Farage and increasingly kind of what are called more blue kip conservatives, do you think that could play a part in it?
Look, I want to be clear, Tan. I've always said I'm true Labour, not blue Labour. I'm somebody who believes passionately in the power of community. I come from the cooperative end of the Labour movement, but the kind of nostalgia for a faux time when actually people weren't free, when the only way people were able to be politically active is, frankly, if their wives were at home, so they could be part of the trade union movement, just as they could be part of the church movement, isn't the progressive world that I want to build, because I want everybody to be able to contribute. On this issue, look, part of it is about people being consistent. There are lots of MPs in Parliament who, as I say, felt that it was the right thing to do to give women in Northern Ireland a human right to access a safe and legal abortion. So we now have a model for what that means. We now have a model for how that protects women's rights, how that stops attacks within the civil service, within the police, within the judiciary, whatever, because actually there are rights and laws that be contested in a democratic fashion and upheld by the Commissioner. But we don't have that system here in England and Wales. We don't have any guidance for what kind of access you should be able to have. We just simply have, well, we won't prosecute you if we think you've met these tests. And what we can see is those tests are being contested. So absolutely, please don't misunderstand me. I'm well aware, I face it every single day, the misogyny that we still have within British politics, both in the chamber, in the debates about it, in how backward we are about where the public are about things. But the public have an opportunity to make a difference here. So we have a petition on the 38 Degrees website. You know, every MP, because it is a matter of conscience, could be part of this campaign. Every MP could put their name to New Clause 20 to the policing bill to be able to get a vote on whether we should make abortion a safe human right in England and Wales like it is in Northern Ireland. And given a lot of them previously supported it for Northern Ireland, it's a reasonable question to ask, well, why would we treat women differently in England and Wales? So I don't think we're so far away from a space where people can actually say, I can see what this means, I can see the difference it can make, I can see what's coming down the line with the Americanisation of the debate around abortion, but also this Trumpian playbook in our politics. And I want to get ahead of it for once rather than be reacting to it.
Absolutely. One of the things that really enraged me was the TfL blocking BPAS ads urging people to contact their MPs. Now, women face harassment every day on public transport, but can't even have posters defending their rights to bodily autonomy. Why is peaceful advocacy being censored, and what will Labour do about that?
I think the strongest statement was made by Sadiq Khan himself, who shared our petition to make abortion a human right in England and Wales. Sadiq has always been a long-term ally. Actually, in 2019, when we were doing this work in Northern Ireland, he was supportive then. So it doesn't surprise me that he's supportive now, and he's the Mayor of London. I think that is the biggest statement that we can get. Many of us have arguments with Transport for London. If I get them to make my station escalators work on a regular basis, I'll be a very happy woman. But they are separate in terms of the operational decisions to the Mayor. What matters here is that the Mayor of London is showing what being an ally looks like.
Oh, Sadiq Khan, yeah, he's very progressive. He's someone that's usually on the right side of history on most things. My issue is, though, that links back into how misogyny is institutional and it's in virtually all of our institutions. And it makes us feel like public spaces are unsafe for women, but safe for censorship, essentially. And I feel that Labour really has an opportunity here to stand up for freedom of expression, not just on this topic, but broadly, because it all links back to women being half the population and still feeling like second-class citizens.
I tell you one of the things, I'm really impatient for the Protection from Sex-Based Harassment Act to be commenced, because actually we passed that in the last Parliament, and that is misogyny as hate crime. We wanted to do that because it's one of the ways that you can really tackle street harassment, which is to identify, there are patterns of behaviour. I've always said I'll stop campaigning on making misogyny a hate crime when I go to the wedding and the bride says, well, he followed me down the street in a van saying, get in the back, love. And I thought it was the most romantic thing ever. Doesn't happen. But we know that women get targeted on our streets. That piece of legislation, actually, we passed that in partnership with Greg Clark. But that was done under the last government. It's not yet been commenced. I'd love to see that commenced. There are very clear measures. And I think this thing about this debate, Tan, right? Nothing that we're talking about is new or novel or untested or untried. Absolutely. In the fight often for women's rights and for equality, we're having to repeat ourselves again and again and again, show the evidence time and time again. I'm not asking people to take a chance on women's rights in England and Wales. I'm asking them to stand up and protect them as we have in other parts of the UK. The institutional misogyny that exists asks us to show, it's like the thing about, measure twice, cut once. Well, we've shown this measure works repeatedly. Now is the time to make it happen. So I'm with you in the frustration. I just refuse to be distracted or deterred by it.
It's infuriating that certain groups that have been made the subject of culture wars are having to fight again and again for their rights, whether it's the LGBT community, particularly trans people, being weaponised in culture wars. And that's what worries me, is because we're seeing a marked increase in online misogyny as well as far-right content. And as we know, that doesn't just stay online. No. That moves also into the public sphere. And there are an increase in attacks on women. A global study actually found that 57% of Gen Z men believe feminism's gone too far. I'm stifling a laugh here, and now discriminates against men. So I would like to know if you feel that this is, a prime moment for Labour to take a stand for a progressive policy and push back against that and implement measures to combat online hatred, which feeds into this whole thing, because I feel that kind of makes more of a case for limiting women's rights personally, because if men are believing this, then what are they going to do in terms of taking a stand with us to protect our bodily autonomy?
So again, I'm going to show my age, and that also I'm a bit of a film nerd. Like, one of my favourite films of all time is Thelma and Louise. But Gina Davis devoted her life to covering media coverage and communication about women. And she's done these amazing studies, one of which showed that if a room has 20% women in, the men think it's 50-50. And if it has 30% women in, they think there's more women than men in the room. One of the challenges I think about our politics right now is it's not enough to get women in the room. So one of the things that drives me crazy is the idea that we just have to get a woman. There has to be a woman on the front bench. There has to be a woman in the room. And somehow women are covered, as if we're a kind of uniform group of people. And actually, the person I used to take lessons about that from was Margaret Thatcher. Because Margaret Thatcher used to write in her diaries when she was in the shadow cabinet in the 1970s about the frustration of being considered the every woman and the person who could speak for all women in the entire country. It is time, absolutely. When you are facing a backlash, you have two options. You can run away or regroup, or you can stand firm and speak out. We need to speak out, because I think for the last couple of years, I don't know about you, Tan, but I'm sick of people telling me not to feed the trolls. So I end up being a sponge, soaking up this stuff online and offline, because I get death threats all the time. I get the police telling me that is free speech. And I've had people do that in front of my kids now, which is really inappropriate and makes me see red in a way that means that, I am not prepared to take it. But actually, if it's just about fighting to be there, that's missing the point. We're not seeing the talent and potential of women. But I want to issue a warning to you, Tan, as well, because if we think this is as bad as it gets, this is just starting. This backlash, this organisation, like I say, it's been going on under the radar, and we've been kind of seeing it and discounting and saying, well, that could never happen here. And now we're seeing the police, even under, frankly, a Labour government, issuing guidance about tracking women's fertility apps. And, one of the things I keep saying to people, the reason why we have to decrim is that if any kind of offence involving abortion remains on the platform, so if we just take women out of the law, they'll go after the partners, they'll go after the medics, and then get women to give evidence as part of that process. So we have to stand up and speak out and hold our ground, because we're still only the 30%. It's when people say to me, isn't it great you've managed to get to 40% in Parliament? It's, yeah, look at the turnover. look how difficult it is for women to remain in the public eye. I know so many activists who are burning out because we're not even in the room in equal numbers. And before we get into the room, it's still like, yeah, you can be in the room, but don't speak too much. Wait and see if you can find a man to repeat your point. Like, we've got to take a decision now before this gets worse, that we want to get the best out of each of us for the benefit of all of us. And that, for me, is where we've got to take the debate, because that's also about men. Look, you know, got to be honest with you, Tan, I love men. I'm raising one. I live with one. I have lots, some of them are my best friends. And I think the world of them. And I don't think we're doing them justice, whether it is in terms of how we treat their relationship to their kids, their role in society, this debate, because they have a role to play. They have a responsibility and accountability for their actions, but also their ambitions and their aspirations. Like, fundamentally, the point about equality is it's not a trade-off. It's about a trade-up. It's that actually if more people are in the room contributing, more gets done. It's not that there is this lump of opportunity and it's either men get it or women get it. That's how Donald Trump talks. I mean, that's why they're feeding the idea. That's the Andrew Tate idea, that somehow if the girls in the class are doing well, you're doing badly, rather than they're going to do things that are going to inspire you. And I want my little boy to be inspired as much as I want my little girl to have no barriers. So we need to reclaim the idea that somehow there's a trade-off. Fundamental bodily autonomy is at the heart of that, because if women are seen as first and foremost just vehicles for having kids, when Nigel Farage talks about wanting to make women have more kids, we need to stand up and say, I'm sorry, I don't recall contacting the DWP to have a conversation about contraception. It is not about the benefits system. Women and men will make choices equally if they are equally able to control what happens to them. And that is the best kind of world to live in, where everybody is free.
I love the way you flip that old narrative. It's like, well, some of my best friends are men. You know, it's such.
You know what I mean? Like I get it. I get it. I promise you. You post this, it'll be like all about, oh, you must hate men. You want to. It's like, no. I love them. It's because I think the world of them. I want a better world for them, and I know that equality delivers a better world for everyone, one that's more prosperous, more stable. There's less conflict. There's more ingenuity. Like, we can face some of those really big challenges together. And that is not a Hollywood blockbuster. That is actually empirical fact.
Well, absolutely. And I hate it when men are kind of centred in this, or centre themselves in when women have the floor. And as you say, it's not just about women being in the room, but it's about women being safe in the room and listened to. Because I think that study you were referring to too found that men think that women speak more than they do in conversations too. But it's interesting you picked out Thatcher, considering that she didn't put any women in her cabinet.
Yeah. You know, but like, again, why are we holding Thatcher to a higher standard than John Major?
I don't.
Like, I will always stand up for the right of women to be as crap as men, because that then is equality. Like, loads of us, as I'm always told all the time, I'm a mediocre middle-aged woman. You know, great. True equality is an equal number of us. But it's about, you know, we have to show that this is a better world, because what Farage is talking about doing, and JD Vance and Trump, they take us backwards. They take us to a world that isn't as able to cope with shocks, that isn't as able to cope with things like a pandemic or crazy. I mean, the tariffs are self-induced by Trump, but, you know, that is not the world I want to give to my kids. And I think that lots of people feel like that. So I don't want to exclude anyone, but I'm not going to give men a free pass any more than I'm going to give women who internalise misogyny a free pass about this. Change is possible. Why do we not treat women in England and Wales with the same dignity that we treat women in Northern Ireland? French women have a constitutionally protected right to an abortion, and that means they know they've got that protection if they need it. Then they can make the choice, not me making that choice for them. That is freedom, that is emancipation, that is what social justice is about.
Well, it's massively regressive, but I also think that a Labour government with such a massive majority should not be led by the kind of narratives of a 5 MP party or an American.
Is it 5? I thought there were 4 now. Because
oh yeah, I've just realised Lowe got booted, didn't he? But the problem is that they are dominating the narrative, and I think that, you know, the problem that I have is you've taken a lot of abuse, right, for doing this as a woman.
I know, but I've tried to ban my family from being on social media, Tan, and they just won't have it. They enjoy the kitten pitch too much.
But it's not okay. But the thing that concerns me is if even a woman in position of power, such as yourself, is facing it, What hope is there for the rest of us in challenging this?
I want to be upfront because, frankly, the biggest, I mean, I used to joke that I was the kind of patron saint of unpopular causes within the Labour movement because I took on refugee rights, I took on abortion, I took on payday lenders, Brexit. Like, that's what I came into politics to do. I'm hugely privileged to be able to do what I do. I adore my community, I adore my country, and I want to fight for its future. But if I'm honest, the place where I've had the most abuse and had the least success and the most frustration, and it's within my own political movement, is about motherhood and the impact that that has on your ability to achieve your potential and the way in which we treat parents. So I am very clear-eyed about the battles that need to happen internally and the battles to come. But what I want to tell the people listening and watching this is, like, the reason I'm sat here is not because I'm a masochist, right? As you can tell, if I could spend all my life watching trash telly and trash films, I would do. But there is a fight to be had that is worth it. I'm sat here because change is possible. Let's flip this round. Let's be clear-eyed. There are threats to our abortion access in this country now. Those threats are only going to increase. We need to put access to a safe and legal abortion beyond whoever is in power, beyond party politics, as a basic human right that we defend and advance accordingly. But you know where I take hope from? Is to talk to the people involved in Northern Ireland. Because when we did that in Northern Ireland, believe me, it was a battle. And it's taken a long time. And services still aren't quite right. Because we've had to fight people within the civil service. We've had to fight people within government. But I can tell you, like, there are moments where I was talking to a previous Secretary of State, right? The way we wrote the law in Northern Ireland was that the Secretary of State had direct responsibility to make this happen. I was talking to a previous Secretary of State who wasn't particularly pro-abortion rights and who was telling me about having to fight this battle for women in Northern Ireland and having to force the services to happen because he knew otherwise he would be taken to court again. So when people tell me that it isn't possible, I think about those conversations and realise we couldn't have achieved that. That wasn't me. That was the amazing women in Northern Ireland who stood their ground, spoke up and demanded better and asked us in the UK Parliament to stand with them. And when we did, the revolution that comes where you've got, a conservative Secretary of State who the last thing they wants to be doing is talking about women's bodies, having to have detailed conversations about where they can access services, showing me a timetable of where that will happen, promising me and pleading with me not to take him to court just yet because he was trying to make it happen. The power can be in our hands. We can make change happen. That is why this is worth it. So be aware of the threat. Know that the velociraptors are in the incubator. Know that you can fight them and know that when we do, amazing things happen.
Well said. And it's also really important to note that what you're doing with this is taking abortion out of criminal law and making it a healthcare matter.
Yeah. So what I want to be really clear about is it's not that there would be decriminalisation means deregulation. There would be regulations. What we're explicit about in our amendment, which no other amendment does, is that those must be human rights compliant. So for the first time, we would write into the law a human right to a safe and legal abortion and demand that any regulation, any provision of service has to meet that test. So it has to be one which upholds a progressive access to abortion. The other thing that we've done that you'll like, Tan, is we've written in a lock to restrict ministerial powers. And again, no other amendment, all the other amendments may well facilitate ministerial power on this in secondary committees. Now, bear with me because this is really boring, but it really, really matters. You might have heard people talking about Henry VIII powers. Every piece of legislation that we now write has what's called secondary legislation power in it. So it gives ministers the ability to make changes to the law relevant to that legislation, not through the whole of Parliament, but just in a small committee of people that the whips pick on a kind of day-to-day basis. Those powers used to be used pretty sparingly. George Osborne set a new test for it. So George Osborne used secondary legislation powers to change tuition fee rates, to do benefit cuts, all sorts of things. The previous government was going to use those powers to rip up 4,000 pieces of legislation from Europe. And again, small committees of MPs agreeing to it with an inbuilt government majority, very hard to fight against. What we've done in this amendment is to write in a lock that says that no minister can use the powers in this legislation around abortion to do that through secondary legislation when it comes to that human right. So you can't bind a future parliament. That's an important democratic principle in this country. Thank God, because, we'd still be living with some of the things that Boris Johnson is doing, like the Rwanda bill, if that was the case. But you can demand that it's a properly democratic moment and that every MP has a vote on it, which means that everybody could lobby their MP on it, which is what you can do about this proposal right now. You might want to call it a Farage lock because it's there in case there are future governments that are less progressive, but it's also sending a message about the importance of Parliament and the importance of democracy when it comes to human rights, which linked into, as you say, those attacks on the European Court of Human Rights are really, really important. You know, the use of secondary powers, those Henry VIII powers to undermine really big pieces of legislation is now, unfortunately, established as a possible policy in this country. This amendment would be a fight back against that as well. So it would protect our human right, it would protect progressive services and the regulation of them, but it would also make sure that we wouldn't see those prosecutions and investigations because it would actually repeal the abortion 18th century laws properly. It wouldn't leave that on the statute, so nobody could be done via them.
Okay, that's an interesting bit of background there. I didn't know that.
I know, so nerdy. It's like horrible histories, but without the drinking.
I've got real concerns. I mean, just in the sense, because this is ultimately about agency, power and control.
Yeah.
Something that's historically held by men, unfortunately. So if this amendment doesn't pass, what happens next? And also, can you tell us what people watching can actually do?
Well, at the moment, we have this existing framework of the criminal. So it is entirely conceivable that the investigations and prosecutions will continue. It is also entirely possible for a future government to change buffer zones. So we wrote buffer zones and we had a vote in Parliament to stop prayers outside and said, no, that's not appropriate to happen there. That could be undermined. And what also could be undermined, so the anti-abortion movement, we have to be really clear, they're a lot cleverer than people give them credit for. They never come and say, we want to stop abortion. What they say is, well, we need more safeguards, don't we? Because women might make bad choices. So let's put more safeguards in. So one of the things they talk about is more demands that women see more doctors in person. And of course, anybody who's ever tried to get a doctor's appointment knows what a delay that puts into treatment. And it's worth remembering that before 10 weeks, you can take pills, and therefore it's a relatively quick procedure. After 10 to 11 weeks, you start getting to the position where you probably need to have an operation. So again, it puts more delay into the process. And what these people want to do is delay and delay and delay because it makes it more likely that a woman might feel that she couldn't have an abortion even if she wanted to have one. So it's not an accidental thing to do. Like I say, it's not accidental what Nigel Farage is doing. It's much more subtle about making it something that you have to justify, that you have to explain yourself for, that maybe you have to see many more people to talk about before you can actually make that decision, that you probably don't know your own mind. All those attacks, I fear, will intensify, and there is no protection that, whether they're successful or not, about the kind of regulation, about the kind of approach that should be taken to accessing abortion, because it's not legal. So first and foremost, we absolutely need to decriminalise it. We need that human rights law because decrim isn't enough to protect it given the attacks that are happening right now, and to give a guidance about the kind of service we think you should get. It's really simple then. There are three things that people watching this can do. Number one, they can write to their MP and ask them to co-sign new clause 20 to the policing bill. That makes abortion a human right. It's a copy, a replica of what we did in Northern Ireland. So any MP concerned about how it would work can look at Northern Ireland and see the work of the Human Rights Commissioner there to see how it works and that it is effective as a mechanism for ensuring progressive access to an abortion and protecting women from attacks. Secondly, there is a petition on 38 degrees that they can sign. The petition is a great way to get involved in the campaign itself. The petition will update you on how you can help us win this argument, how we can get that message across. With everything else that's going on in the world, I know people are really, really busy, but actually if we all took those actions together, it could make a real difference. So the third thing people can do is to tell other people to contact their MP, except if they live in Walthamstow. Please don't contact me because I promise you that's a given. And to sign that petition, to share that petition. If you go to my social media, if you go to Jolie Brearley's social media, The Guilty Feminists, I think you shared it as well, you can find links on how to do those three things really easily. Ask your MP to sign new clause 20, sign the petition, share those two actions.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important. I mean, do you think that if the bill passes, that this would help end the kind of surveillance that we have for women that are victims of crime broadly? Because as we know, rape victims are unfortunately treated like they're on the stand themselves. They have their histories, their texts, their period apps. Now with people being, women being arrested for having miscarriages, which is a chilling precedent. So we know the state is unfortunately policing women's private lives and surveilling what should be a healthcare issue. Do you think that if the amendment passes, that would make improvements in terms of how this is policed? Because we know that the police have got a long way to go in terms of rebuilding trust with women.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why in this amendment, and no other amendment does this, we have repealed the very criminal laws around abortion that are being used. Because my worry is if you leave any vestige of those laws on the statute book, they will just, as I say, go after the partners, they'll go after the medics, they'll go after the people around you, and then demand that women give evidence and demand that women, they might treat them as hostile witnesses, because we don't know where this push for investigation has come from. So we just need those laws gone. That doesn't mean that if there was coercion, if there was abuse of somebody, that there aren't other laws that could cover that, but it would mean that the police would not be able to pursue somebody on the basis of their involvement in an abortion, full stop. And I think that was important because it provides protection for those medics as well, and those brilliant people who support women having abortions. That doesn't mean that there wouldn't be regulations that they would have to follow. Abortion would be properly regulated as a healthcare issue, just as it is in Northern Ireland, and just as any other healthcare matter is, and that there are medical regulations, and if somebody breached those, there would be consequences. But this is a healthcare framework rather than a criminal framework. I actually think some of the bigger things you're talking about, I look at the Louise Casey report. I deal with the Met all the time as a London MP. I think the Met itself has some real challenges, and I'm not convinced that we can make the current structure of the Met work and deal with that institutional misogyny and homophobia and racism that we've seen kind of trying to reform within. I think we probably do need a more fundamental conversation about its role, about how it treats crimes. And I say that as somebody who has full, frank and free discussions about their treatment of rape victims, of domestic abuse cases, of stalking, of harassment. The person who you should definitely be talking to about this, who I frankly think should be knighted or given the freedom of the country, is Claire Waxman, who is the London Victims Commissioner and is an incredible woman who's doing incredible work on this. And anything Claire wants us to champion, I will do wholeheartedly in Parliament. This is about a very particular form of crime that's clearly being weaponised around women. We have to get rid of that crime because it's not appropriate for it to be a crime. But we shouldn't think that if we just do that, there aren't wider challenges within the police that need addressing as well. No.
Yeah, I mean, because the problem is, historically, I mean, not to go off topic, but they have, unfortunately, there's been more of an emphasis on Islamic extremism than far-right extremism, which again is giving the far-right a free pass to rise in this country. So do you think that taking a stand on this particular amendment would be the start of a progressive pushback from Labour against Faragian-style politics and stop the US from influencing our politics?
I mean, I think the American funders, the organisations, those campaigning techniques and ideas, those people are going to keep organising around the world, because it's not just here in England that they're doing it. I also think a lot of women, frankly, have lost hope in politics. They kind of think, what's the point? You're all the same. One of the ways that we could show that we aren't all the same is to have a fight that really matters, which is to fight for their fundamental human rights, because as I say, I think a lot of people listening to this may not have even realised that abortion isn't legal in the first place. So when people come for it, when people weaponise it, it's much easier to deconstruct it than people might realise. I want to give people listening hope that it is possible. You know, change is possible. It's just bloody hard work. But if you do that, I think we send a broader message about what else is possible. That's why I'm also fighting for fundamental reform of our parental leave rights, because it's bonkers to me that when the motherhood penalty exists because we basically expect women to give up their lives when they have children rather than rebuilding a life around it, and we don't expect the dads to be part of that conversation. We certainly don't see different types of families, so same-sex families get written out of the conversation as well, and we all miss out as a result. I want people to know that it doesn't have to be like this, but if we want it to be different, we have to change it. We can't just sit around and expect somebody else to do it. Like, now is the time more than ever to get involved in our politics, because if you think this is the worst it's going to get, you haven't seen anything yet.
Well, that's the worry. I mean, the worry that I have is like the dark money, the opaque funding, the lobbying groups, the Heritage Foundation. And don't you think that whilst obviously those other parts that you're mentioning there in terms of bills to protect women are important, don't you think that stopping it at the source and legislating against those people influencing and lobbying our politicians in the first place would be an ideal start?
Totally. And we had a debate in Parliament about this. And one of the concerns I have, again, we're importing from America what Americans call 527 companies. It's basically third-party organisations who will campaign against individual MPs. And I've had it happen to me. And therefore, they don't have to follow any of the Electoral Commission rules unless somebody goes after them and prosecutes them and shows that actually they're breaching them because of the connections and the joins up. You're right. Our electoral laws are far behind the curve, especially what people can do online. And I just want to give a shout out to all the Russian bots and Iranian bots who probably, again, will be commenting below this. They're all over my Facebook. They're all in my local community groups pretending to be real people. Those are the velociraptors of this debate as well. We can get ahead of these things. It is more complicated because of the connection to hostile states. And I think there has been the start of recognition, the start of investigating that. Again, I go back to, there's also those connections in terms of the funding for anti-abortion activism and the joining up of it. My question to everybody who thinks themselves as progressive is how much more do you need to start getting active? Because I'm not going to tell you that politics is perfect. I'm not going to tell you that political parties are perfect. Look, I've been in the Labour movement over 30 years now. I've disagreed with every Labour leader about something. I've fought my corner. I've won arguments. I've lost arguments. I've been wrong about a lot of stuff. But I know that the debate matters. I know that it's possible to win arguments. It's harder to do that if you're being drowned out by this kind of hostility, which is why we should all stand up to it and we should all call it out, because certainly I've seen firsthand third-party organisations being used to promote some incredibly slanderous, shocking claims and to try and change debates at a very, very localised level. Now, when it came to me, people said, well, this is a seat that people think is relatively safe. I would never say that. I adore and I fight for every single vote in Walthamstow, and I'll do that as long as they'll have me. But if you think 1 in 5 constituencies now in this country has a very small margin, so this kind of stuff really could affect the outcome of the next election if we don't get ahead of it. And I hope the government is listening to those of us who've seen those third-party organisations and seeing how they're using to avoid the rules about accountability will take a very strong interest in it before it gets too late.
No, absolutely. I mean, we have a profound lack of kind of like a proper written constitution. It's all still very old boy handshakes between rich men.
It's the good chap principle. And there are lots of good chaps out there and good chapesses, but there's also a lot of naughty boys and naughty girls too.
And it's totally, not prepared for that. It's based on a concept of honour, which sadly, when you get infiltrated by people that are dishonourable, it can't handle it. And the thing that you were saying about bots there, that's a real problem. It's kind of like essentially falls under the bracket. A lot of them have the hallmarks of a Russian or a hostile state kind of interference job. You sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's happening.
Totally. Either that or you sound like Lynn Truss, because their punctuation and their spelling is atrocious and it drives you mad.
Well, yeah, exactly. But
because it's AI generated, isn't it? Well, but it also creates the environment. I mean, we laugh about it, but it creates an environment where people think that is normal political discourse. So look, for my sins, Tan, I am now technically a senior MP, which is really depressing in many ways. Probably says more about, say, my musical taste and my fashion sense. But when I got elected in 2010, at least people would ask a question before they got angry. Now people come really angry, expecting you to send some cookie cutter response, to not engage. They're already prepared to be cross with you. So it's really hard to have a conversation about something like, I would love everything to be simple and easy. Lots of issues are quite complicated. Lots of issues if you really want, if you're not wanting to be Nigel Farage, showing up rather than making a difference and taking action can be complicated. It can require multiple versions. It's really hard to have that conversation if people are just angry at you and you can't even hear what they're trying to get to or talk to them about what the different options might be.
And they're not always
That's the job. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, they're not always people. These are bots. And the problem is they are radicalising people, whether it is misogynistic, whether it's far right, whatever they're selling. And it creates this illusion of mass consensus, which is what I think is fueling reform's support. And the thing is, a lot of them have been found to be very pro-reform, very pro-GB News. I don't have the direct evidence, so I'm not going to make an allegation, but he's certainly benefiting from this. And again, this comes back to a lot of this coming back to regulation, because as we know, they're profoundly misogynistic, they're deeply racist, and Elon Musk is essentially jacking the algorithm in favour of these people. So
Elon Musk has systematically attacked colleagues of mine in Parliament, and it's women of colour, and that's actually very dangerous. I mean, I can laugh at, and I was going to share some actually online, and I'll share them with you later. Kind of some of them sound like kind of Wurzel Gummidge, some of the AI bots. So I had someone the other day calling me a trout and a treasonous witch, which I think if you see trout and a treasonous witch like Wurzel Gummidge, you can take a step back from them. But when I see my colleagues' safety, I mean, look, I've lost colleagues. So both David Amess and Joe Cox were friends. They were decent people, didn't agree with them on everything, fought with them on some things, but to lose them is it's still incredibly painful. I still think I see Joe in her running gear, running through a corridor in Parliament trying to make it back for bedtime. I still think I see David Amess at the top of the escalator sometimes, because that's where he used to hang out. Like, the very real world consequences of this are all too much on our minds as MPs. And I want to tell you that I don't think it's safe right now. And I particularly don't think it's safe for people with kids. I'm just telling you that I also think we could do something about that. And at the moment, the fight I'm having with the parliamentary authorities and with the police is to try and challenge that, because I don't want to lose another colleague.
Do you think you have support for that at the top of the Labour Party in Cabinet?
I think those people are experiencing it as well. I think the challenge is it becomes form fulfilling, doesn't it? Where people say, oh, well, it's the heat of the kitchen and this is what normal debate looks like. That's why the don't feed the trolls thing is so bad. Actually, we should all be saying to the trolls, sit them down. We wouldn't let that happen in a pub. If you saw somebody in a pub being harassed, you'd be like, barman, like, that's not okay. Leave that person alone. We all need to do that, because we're normalising a level of violence and hostility and vitriol that is killing our ability to make good policy. And we should see that, and the fact it's funded, and we see the way in which those kind of ideas and tropes are being promoted and encouraged, and that kind of training. Like, people used to be excited and they'd all go to America because they'd watched too many episodes of The West Wing and they'd learn how to do various campaign techniques. This is something completely different. We should have no truck with it, and we should be calling it out, because actually it's hampering our ability to get to the answers we need to get to. You know, when Mr. Farage wants to tell you that the problem is all immigrants, that somehow that's the answer to every question he gives, we know that's not true, but we need to have a conversation about what the answers should be. And that's not happening either, because we're spending all our time having to defisk what he's saying about, or debunk rather, what he's saying about immigrants.
That's why I think Labour would really benefit from being on top of the comms and press regs, to be honest with you. But as you mentioned, it's not just killing policy, this problem, it's killing women. An alarming amount of women get killed per week. And, and the scapegoated figures are facing more hate crimes. So it's something that's really urgent for us to get on top of. Now, what I'd like to ask you about is, when the amendment is being debated, I've got the information here in front of me, but I'd like you to let our audience know when the amendment will be debated, where they can watch it.
The petition is on 38 degrees. Amazing. If you would share it, Tan, we're all sharing it on social media. Please sign it. It's the best way to get involved in the campaign and get actions from it. You can also write to your MP direct to ask them to sign New Clause 20. That's really important, because our chances of getting a vote on New Clause 20 and being able to make this happen are directly related to how many MPs express support for it. And the best way they can express support is to co-sign it and put their name to it and say, this debate needs to happen in Parliament. This is for the report stage of the policing bill. So the policing bill goes through various stages in Parliament, and it's gone through the committee stage. So there are a small group of people go through it line by line. They then report it back to the main chamber, so every MP can be part of it. I don't know for sure when that will be. We've been told probably the middle of next month, so June. We haven't got very long at all. We've maybe got a week, 10 days to make this argument. So I'm asking people, look, just give us a bit of your time in the next 10 days, because you will really, really regret it if we don't get this right and we keep seeing those attacks, and we actually see those attacks being even more successful than they already have been. But we don't have a definite date for sure. Keep an eye out on social media, sign that petition, you'll get updates as to when we do know, when we have a confirmed date. But the most important thing now is to get those signatures on that amendment and get that petition up.
That's long overdue. The entire thing is long overdue. We've only been waiting since the 1800s, literally, for it to happen. And I don't want it to be another thing that's kicked down the road, you know, much like marital rape was, unfortunately, back in the day. It was 90s, wasn't it, before that was even outlawed?
But, you know, one of the things that was really salutary to me when I first got elected in 2010, one of the first debates I took part in Parliament as a new MP was about whether or not there should be anonymity for victims of rape. And I was really shocked. I was like, I thought we'd had this. I thought we all understood why this needed to be in the case. What you realise is that Martin Luther King is wrong. Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It doesn't unless you keep fighting for it, because it can bend back. And what we are seeing now is that backlash, and there is a sustained, funded, coordinated backlash. We have to push back, because otherwise you end up having debates you thought that you had won. The great news is we won the debate on this in Northern Ireland, so we are potentially able to win the debate in England and Wales, now not from a basis that it's an article of faith that having a human right is a good idea, but from an article of fact about what impact it has on service access and protecting women's rights.
And it's also a moment for men to get involved and step up. I have a lot of men saying to me all the time, because, you know, the emotional labour even extends to this. It's like, what can I do to help you? And you get a lot of the far right men claiming that they're protecting women, right? Or they care about protecting women, but only usually when pushing a scapegoated figure, you know.
Abortion access has no gender at all, and neither does protecting it. So if you are a man who believes that equality matters to your life too, if you want to protect your sisters, your mothers, your aunts, your cousins, your nieces, your friends, sign the petition, ask your MP to join it. This is not a lady law. Like I always find in politics, we have the lady laws, the things that people think are for ladies. Ladies talk about babies. No, I did biology. These two people are involved in making a baby. Everybody can be part of fighting for equality, because everybody benefits when we do.
And not just that, you know, women are people regardless of their relationship.
Careful, Tan. I mean, that really is radical talk.
We're actually people. But also it could impact men, because, you know, we've got situations in the US where men have had to watch their wives or their girlfriends bleed out. We've got a horrific case at the moment where a woman that has died is
Georgia
alive as an incubator for a baby that is, unfortunately, because it's the heartbeat law, there's concerns about the brain activity of the baby. It is disgusting and chilling. So women are dying as a consequence of not getting abortions when they need them. And as we know, with the kind of far right rhetoric, this could only escalate.
Men are not winning as a result. So some of the language, some of the anger that Trump and Tate promote is this idea that somehow women have been winning and therefore men are losing. When you see the outcome of this kind of Trumpian playback, nobody's winning. People are just grieving. They're grieving for their loved ones caught up in horrific situations. So I think we should be really clear. This isn't about somehow redressing the balance, that men have feelings, emotions, you know, they are part of our future too. They don't want this either. They can be part of making sure it doesn't happen by standing with us. This is not the time for people to try and play men and women off against each other, because that's what Tate and Trump do. This is about the good life, and the good life we can all lead together if we fight for it.
It's about redressing the balance, not regressing us massively. So before we wrap, is there anything else you want to say to people watching who might be feeling angry, scared or uncertain about where we're heading? And what do you want them to remember the most about this conversation?
So having completely trashed the idea that American politics is a good thing and all the people learning from there is one lesson from American politics, from American trade union politics, that I hold in my heart every single day. Don't mourn, organise. Absolutely. The world is a really dangerous, unstable place right now. I wish there was a conspiracy, because then it would at least mean that somebody had a plan. There isn't a plan. There's lots of people trying to work out how on earth you cope with a world. Like, every generation has had difficult challenges to deal with: poverty, inequality, war, conflict. No generation has had to do so many of those things within their own lifetime. I always reflect on the fact that I still have jumpers that are technically older than the internet. If you think about how that has changed our lives in such a way, I am of that age as well. It's like, look at my film references. But like, things are moving really, really quickly. So I share that concern, that confusion, that fear, but you can't let it overwhelm you, because if we organise, amazing things can happen. The world is also a brilliant, beautiful place where change can happen, where we can actually find each other online to do good things, where we can actually speak up for a more inclusive society, where we don't have to find somebody to blame, we can find a solution. You know, I came into politics because I think somewhere in my community is a kid who could cure cancer, who could create the new technology that tackles climate change. I just want to tear down the barriers that are stopping them from doing that. When I think about the world like that, I don't mourn. I organise because I can see what is possible. Women's rights are under attack. Abortion access is under attack in England and Wales. Decrim is not enough to protect that. Only a human right would. But imagine how we will feel if by the end of this year we've given women in this country the equal status of a human right to control what happens to their body, how you will feel about what else could be changed in this world.
If my mic was light enough to drop, I would drop it after that. So brilliant. Thank you again for joining us today, Stella. Really appreciate the conversation. And to everyone out there, get sharing. I will drop all of the links in the description of the video. But thank you for joining us, Stella. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tan. And thank you for being a platform for having these conversations, because it is difficult to do that. It is difficult when you get a load of negative feedback, when people expect you to be perfect all the time. So the fact that you keep going, like I say, I go back to, I've seen a lot of people burn out recently, and I'm really worried about it. So the other rule I have in life is we always need to have a cup of tea and a biscuit. So anytime you want a cup of tea and a biscuit, you come and knock on my door.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks again.
And I always have the good biscuits. None of your custard cream rubbish. No, got to be a Fox's Viennese. Got to be a Fox's Viennese.
Absolutely. No Bourbons.
What do you think I am, a savage?
Again, thank you. Appreciate it.